I know you're all hungry, but there have been so many questions coming in, so I'm going to take a bit of your lunch. You have a lot of time anyhow, and bring back Sverker, Luisa, and Ann-Kristin on stage to answer some of the questions. You can please stay on to it as well, of course. So there was so much activity going on this Slido, so we just couldn't leave it. And you'll have time to discuss it over lunch as well. Please, Luisa, welcome. All right. Mr. Sörlin, the world is in the middle of a new tech revolution represented by AI. Do you think AI could change the approach to the green industry?
I don't know, really. It will probably affect this, all the industries we talk about here, just as it affects everything else, I think. But I don't think we should count on this only to help us. It's not going to solve the problems we hear about here. For example, if you face the challenge of should you or should you not open a mine near Jokkmokk, which is in conflict with Sami interests, you cannot go to AI to find the answer to that question. That's a political question. That's a question about values and norms. And it has to be decided. But I don't think AI can help us in that.
You mentioned that the answer is very often technology, at least for some of the policy orientations you described. Is there too much focus on the possibilities with the technology?
Well, I love technology. I mean, it's good that we can develop. Technology is part of this big transition. It's absolutely central. Many innovations are a prerequisite for moving on with this. But again, I think some of the tougher decisions doesn't really even involve technology. They are on another value. They are on the value side. And you have to make tough decisions about, for example, if you want to use the energy of this enormous industrial development to actually improve communities and develop communities. That is not necessarily primarily a technological issue. It's an issue for community building, for social planning, for politics, and for redistribution of. I mean, there are things we know already. We just need to pursue them. And sometimes one of the difficult things in life is to say no. Certain things shouldn't just be done. And these are tough decisions because they're also part of this ball game. So really you have a very challenging work here these couple of days to supplement the conclusions for the report.
Thank you, sir. Ann-Kristin, I had a question for you, referring to the purpose of Northvolt's CEO. If stabilizing the borderless atmosphere is what drives him, why is it surprising or wrong not to focus on local? So I think the questionnaires want to know if he should talk a little bit more about the local impacts.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that was my very point. I think that the values or the focus for the business interest at the moment, these are good, that it's global climate change. I think my point is that compared to cases that have shown how investment creates profit or well-being for the society has been driven also by a regional and local focus. And I think that in this very, very high speed of investments, it's like the supply for batteries all over the world, rather than to think about also how to create an attractive environment for the companies in the region. So I think that was my point, and I hope it was an answer.
Thank you, Ann-Kristin. And this is a question for you, Luisa. What are the lessons learned from Italy's very generous subsidies for energy efficiency in homes? How were conflicts with cultural heritage addressed, for instance?
Yes, sure. The Anonymous knows the Italian situation. Yes, there was it is difficult to say something about. It's not a lesson learned. It's still in running. There was a strong help to enterprises to support passive intervention for buildings in Italy in the last 2 years, but it was on one hand, it's a very successful policy because the intervention were totally refunded, so it's a gift. But this means that it has been a very not natural pumped policy intervention, and so it was not something that could be maintained during that time. On the other hand, this was presents strong criticality in the Italian cities with very important historical heritage. And this was probably the anonymous refers to a particularly grants referred to passive. But there are many other typologies of intervention with renewable resource, with efficiency of plants and so on, that are still considered in policy, but not so supported. Okay. So the process is still in
ongoing. Okay,
yes.
Thank you, Luisa. This is a question maybe for all of you. It seems that the green industrialization has many negative impacts on the environment. Can we even call it green? Carlo, you seem like you want to grab this one.
Maybe I can take this one. Well, I think we need to call it somehow. And eventually all this is a matter of prioritization, what we consider which is more relevant in terms of environmental depletion or environmental impacts. Currently, climate is clearly on top of that list. So in that respect, it's greener than other modes of production, but it still is in the framework of, well, extractive capitalism, if you want to call it that way. So there's clear limitations in that approach, but that's what we have today, and that's what we have to deal with. Eventually, there is also this just perspective that we should consider as well. It's not only about being more or less green, it's also being about more or less just. And we heard today about the summarites, but there's also many other examples about people that could be felt behind in these processes. We are now hosting a series of workshops with different groups of people that participate in the just transition, but are not so far involved in the process. And there's very simple and practical examples that these groups are making. We had recently one with disabled people, and they were just claiming and telling us, look, all these recharging stations that are being built are not accessible for us. We cannot recharge our cars with those stations because they're just too high, too tall.
Yeah.
And these kind of simple examples are affecting many different social groups in many different ways. And we need to make this more participatory in order to prevent those issues and make them more inclusive.
Thank you, Carlos. I'm curious what you say about this, Sverker. Could we even call it a green transformation or green transition?
I think we should insist on calling it green because we want it to be green. But it's a very valid question because in many cases it is not green. It is because it, and I would like to repeat the point that I made in my talk. If this just leads to a higher intensity of extractivism and a bigger circulation of materials in the economy, then there will be enormous demands on the technology and the efficiency to sort of even stay even. Still, most of the major trends, although there are good signs in this report about some progress every here and there, the global trends are not very encouraging. Climate is just one of them. So we want to somehow break this vicious circle of constantly growing consumption of the wrong way. We should transfer consumption also over much more to services, much more to the kinds of things that keep societies together. Education, culture, even just being together, care, healthcare, these kinds of things. The constant growing materialization of the economy is the biggest enemy we have. And that is what I mean with green, is to get out of that. And then it could actually be really green.
Thank you, Sörlin. Luisa, do you want to add something?
I think that we have to consider two aspects. The production of green power is certainly green because it's from renewable resource, natural resource, I don't know. But the impact of the production of green energy is green. This has to be considered, and some is probably not sufficient considered. Probably the impact is not green. I mean, if I produce 1 tera by solar or I don't know, whatever, that imply the use of natural resource to cover a land, I already mentioned, or the use of water that is devoted to that and not to other, for example. And on the other hand, this 1 tera is used at 1,000 kilometers for a city that is located 1,000 kilometers from the origin. We are more or less repeating the same that we will do in the past with the coal power plant. And so I don't want to appear too extreme, but this is important. This has to be considered. And then the question of a balanced and the circular economy and a balanced decision also in producing the green power is important.
Thank you, Luisa. That'll be the last comment. So thank you to the panel and for your very inspiring speeches. Before, give them a warm hand. And now it's time for lunch. Was at the first floor, so where you took the photograph, and we will reassemble again at 2 o'clock. So, and please take your time and get acquainted to someone you didn't know already. It's a bit scary, but it could be worthwhile. See you back here at 2 o'clock.